My name is Alina Crawford, and this is the story of how the happiest moment of my life became the doorway to my darkest nightmare, and how a stranger's warning that I dismissed would haunt me forever. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before dawn, unable to sleep from excitement. I was marrying Nathan Reed, the man who had swept me off my feet 3 years ago at a charity gala. He was everything I had dreamed of: successful, charming, attentive, and deeply in love with me, or so I believed. Our relationship had been a whirlwind of romantic gestures, surprise trips, and promises of forever. I had never felt more certain about anything in my life. My bridesmaids arrived early, filling my hotel suite with champagne, laughter, and the nervous energy that comes with big life moments. They helped me into my dress, a stunning ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves and a train that seemed to go on forever. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had everything she had ever wanted. I saw happiness. I saw hope. I had no idea I was looking at a woman walking toward her own destruction. The venue was a historic mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean, with gardens that bloomed in shades of white and cream. Everything was perfect, meticulously planned over 18 months. Nathan had given me complete creative control, saying he just wanted me to be happy, that all he cared about was making me his wife. His words had made me feel cherished, valued, loved. Now I know they were just part of a carefully constructed performance. As I waited in the bridal suite for my cue to walk down the aisle, my father came in. His eyes were wet with tears, and he held both my hands tightly. "You're so beautiful, Ellie," he said, using the nickname only he was allowed to call me. "Are you absolutely sure about this? Because if you have even the slightest doubt, we can walk out that door right now, and I'll support you completely." His words were loving, but also carried a weight I didn't understand at the time. I laughed and assured him I had never been more certain of anything. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and offered me his arm. The music began, and we stepped out into the garden. The aisle was lined with white roses, and at the end stood Nathan in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, flanked by his groomsmen. But my eyes were drawn to his best man, Marcus Chen, who stood closest to Nathan. Marcus and Nathan had been friends since college, and though I had met him several times during our engagement, there was always something about him that made me uncomfortable. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that suggested he knew something I didn't. He never smiled quite right, never met my eyes for too long, always seemed to be measuring his words carefully. As my father and I walked down the aisle, I focused on Nathan's face. He was smiling, but there was something in his expression that I couldn't quite read. Nervousness, I told myself. Just wedding day jitters. Everyone feels this way. We reached the altar, and my father placed my hand in Nathan's. His palm was cold despite the warm afternoon sun, and his grip was tighter than necessary, almost desperate. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bond we were about to enter. I barely heard the words, lost in the moment, in the dream of what my life was about to become. Then came the moment for the exchange of rings. Nathan's hands shook slightly as he slid the band onto my finger, and when I looked up at him, his eyes were glistening with what I thought were tears of joy. That's when it happened. As Nathan and I held hands, facing each other, about to say our vows, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Marcus, stepping slightly forward from his position. His movement was so subtle that most people probably didn't notice, but I did. He leaned in, just inches from my ear, and whispered 5 words that would echo in my mind for years to come. "Don't marry him. Please don't." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I turned my head slightly to look at him, and the expression on his face was one of genuine anguish, of desperate pleading. But the music was playing, everyone was watching, and the officiant was already prompting Nathan to begin his vows. I felt a flash of confusion, of anger even. How dare he try to disrupt my wedding? What kind of twisted joke was this? I made a choice in that split second. I turned back to Nathan, squeezed his hands, and smiled. Marcus stepped back into his position, and the ceremony continued. Nathan recited his vows beautifully, promising to love me in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death do us part. I repeated mine, my voice steady despite the confusion swirling in my mind. We kissed as husband and wife, and everyone erupted in applause. But as we walked back down the aisle together, I glanced back at Marcus. He was standing completely still, his face ashen, looking like a man who had just witnessed a terrible accident and been powerless to stop it. The reception was everything I had imagined. We danced, we ate, we celebrated with our families and friends. Nathan was attentive and loving, introducing me proudly as his wife, never leaving my side. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time I saw Marcus across the room, he was watching me with that same expression of concern. Once, I caught him in what looked like an intense conversation with Nathan near the bar, their faces close together, their voices low and urgent. When Nathan returned to me, his smile was back in place, but there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, I excused myself to go to the restroom. As I was washing my hands, the door opened, and one of Nathan's cousins, a woman named Rebecca whom I had only met twice before, walked in. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern that made my stomach turn. "You look beautiful," she said quietly. "I hope you'll be very happy." There was something in the way she said it, something that sounded more like a condolence than a congratulation, that made me feel sick. "Thank you," I managed to say, but she was already walking into a stall, leaving me alone with my reflection and my growing sense of unease. Nathan and I left the reception around midnight, heading to a luxury hotel where we would spend our wedding night before flying to the Maldives the next afternoon for our honeymoon. In the car, Nathan was quiet, staring out the window, his jaw clenched. I reached for his hand, and he pulled it away, then immediately apologized, saying he was just exhausted from the long day. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. At the hotel, we went up to our suite, a beautiful room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I expected romance, passion, the beginning of our married life together. Instead, Nathan immediately went to the minibar, poured himself a drink, and downed it in one gulp. Then another. I changed into the lingerie I had carefully selected, feeling foolish and exposed when I emerged from the bathroom to find him sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. "Nathan?" I said softly, approaching him. "Is everything okay?" He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that terrified me. It wasn't love, it wasn't desire, it was guilt, raw, overwhelming guilt. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Alina." "Sorry for what?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. He stood up abruptly, started pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. "I can't do this. I thought I could, but I can't." "Can't do what?" "Nathan, you're scaring me." He turned to face me, and tears were streaming down his face. "I love you, Alina, I do, but I'm not in love with you, I never have been." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stumbled backward, reaching for the wall to steady myself. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I made a mistake, a terrible, horrible mistake. I shouldn't have married you, I knew it, and I did it anyway." The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening, this couldn't be real. "Then why did you?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why did you propose? Why did you go through with the wedding? Why did you stand up there and make those vows?" He was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his words destroyed what was left of my heart. "Because I was trying to be someone I'm not, because everyone expected it, because I thought maybe if I went through with it, I could force myself to feel what I was supposed to feel." "What you were supposed to feel?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "What does that mean?" That's when everything came crashing down. Nathan told me, in halting, agonized words, that he was in love with someone else. Someone he had been seeing for over a year. Someone who understood him in ways I never could. And that someone was Marcus. His best man, his college friend, the man who had tried to warn me at the altar. I couldn't breathe. The room was closing in on me. Nathan was still talking, still explaining, but I couldn't hear him over the roaring in my ears. He was gay. He had always been gay. And he had used me, strung me along for 3 years, proposed to me, married me, all while being in a secret relationship with Marcus. The wedding, the vows, the promises of forever. All of it had been a lie designed to hide who he really was from his conservative family and his career as a corporate lawyer at a firm that, according to him, wasn't progressive about such things. "Marcus tried to stop it," Nathan continued, his voice breaking. "He didn't want me to hurt you. He's been begging me to tell you the truth for months. That's why he said what he said at the altar. He was making one last desperate attempt to save you from this." I felt like I was going to vomit. Marcus had known. Marcus had tried to warn me, and I had ignored him. I had married Nathan anyway, walked willingly into this nightmare because I was too caught up in the fairy tale to see the truth. "Get out," I said, my voice cold and dead. "Get out of this room right now." "Alina, please, let me." "Get out." I screamed and he flinched. He grabbed his jacket and left, the door closing softly behind him. I stood there in my expensive lingerie, in the honeymoon suite of the luxury hotel, on my wedding night, completely and utterly alone. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I called my father, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. I know he and my mother came to the hotel immediately, finding me curled up on the bathroom floor, still in my wedding lingerie, shaking uncontrollably. I know that I didn't go on my honeymoon to the Maldives. I know that the marriage was annulled within weeks, that Nathan didn't contest it, that he and Marcus moved in together shortly after, that they eventually relocated to another city where they could live openly as a couple. I know that I spent months in a fog of grief and humiliation, barely able to function, questioning every moment of my relationship with Nathan, wondering how I had been so blind. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I had been so desperate for the dream of marriage, for the white dress and the romantic proposal and the happily ever after, that I had ignored every red flag. Nathan's reluctance to be physically intimate, which I had attributed to him being traditional and wanting to wait. His lack of jealousy when other men showed interest in me. The way he always seemed more interested in planning the wedding than in our actual relationship. All of it had been there, and I had missed it because I didn't want to see it. Marcus tried to reach out to me several times in the months following the annulment. He sent emails apologizing, explaining that he had tried to get Nathan to tell me the truth for over a year, that his warning at the altar had been a last-ditch effort to save me from the pain he knew was coming. I never responded. I didn't blame Marcus. He had tried to help me, but I couldn't bear to have any connection to that part of my life. For a long time, I was angry. Angry at Nathan for using me, angry at myself for being so naive. Angry at the world for letting me believe in something that was never real. I threw myself into therapy, determined to understand how I had let this happen, how I could rebuild my life from the ruins of my destroyed marriage. It was slow, painful work, but gradually I began to heal. I started focusing on my career in graphic design, taking on bigger clients, building a portfolio that I was proud of. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my relationship with Nathan, rebuilt my social life brick by brick. I learned to be alone without feeling lonely, to find value in myself that wasn't dependent on being someone's wife. And slowly, very slowly, I began to date again. Not seriously at first, just casual dinners and coffee dates, testing the waters of trust that Nathan had poisoned. Then, about 2 years after my annulment, I met James at a design conference. He was a photographer, creative and genuine, with a warmth that felt real in a way Nathan's never had. We started as colleagues, collaborating on a project, and friendship grew naturally from there. When he asked me out, I was terrified. I told him on our first date about my failed marriage, about the betrayal, about my fear of trusting again. He listened without judgment, thanked me for my honesty, and told me we could take things as slowly as I needed. He kept that promise. James was patient in ways I didn't know men could be. He let me set the pace, never pushed for more than I was ready to give, proved through consistent actions over time that his feelings for me were real and honest. We dated for a year before we moved in together, another year before he proposed. And when he did, I said yes without hesitation because I knew in my bones that this was different. This was real. We got married in a small ceremony at my parents' house, with just immediate family and our closest friends. It was nothing like my first wedding. There was no elaborate venue, no hundreds of guests, no fairy tale production. It was simple and intimate and authentic. And when I said my vows to James, looking into his eyes, I knew I meant every word. This time, there were no warnings from groomsmen, no last-minute doubts, no hidden secrets waiting to destroy us. This time, it was just two people who genuinely loved each other, choosing to build a life together. I never saw or heard from Nathan again after the first year. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that he and Marcus were still together, that they had started a life in San Francisco where they could be themselves openly. Part of me was glad for them, glad they had found happiness with each other. But a larger part of me remained angry at the collateral damage they had caused in my life, at the time and emotion I had invested in a relationship that was doomed from the start. One day, about 3 years into my marriage with James, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was from San Francisco, and the handwriting was Nathan's. I stood in my kitchen, holding the envelope, debating whether to open it or throw it away. James came in, saw what I was holding, and simply asked, "Do you want to read it?" I thought about it for a long moment, then shook my head. Whatever Nathan had to say to me now, it didn't matter. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no interest in reopening it. I walked to the fireplace, tossed the letter in, and watched it burn. James wrapped his arms around me from behind, and we stood there together, watching the flames consume my past. Today, I'm sitting in the home office that James and I designed together, looking out at the garden we planted last spring. We have a daughter now, a beautiful 2-year-old who has her father's eyes and my stubborn determination. My life is full in ways I never imagined it could be during those dark months after my annulment. I'm successful in my career, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me, married to a man who chose me for exactly who I am. Sometimes, when I tell people about my first marriage, they're shocked by the story. They ask me if I regret it, if I wish I had listened to Marcus's warning at the altar, if I'm bitter about the years I lost with Nathan. The truth is more complicated than a simple yes or no. Do I wish I hadn't been hurt? Of course. Do I wish I had seen the truth sooner? Absolutely. But I also know that the pain I experienced taught me things about myself that I might never have learned otherwise. I learned that love shouldn't require you to ignore warning signs or silence your instincts. I learned that the dream of marriage is worthless if the foundation is built on lies. I learned that healing is possible even from the deepest betrayals, but it requires work and time and the willingness to be vulnerable again despite the risk. Most importantly, I learned that my worth isn't determined by whether someone chooses to love me, but by whether I choose to love myself enough to demand honesty and respect. If I could go back and talk to that bride standing at the altar, ignoring Marcus's desperate warning, I would tell her to listen. I would tell her that the embarrassment of a canceled wedding is nothing compared to the agony of a destroyed marriage. I would tell her that she deserves better than to be someone's cover story, someone's attempt at normalcy, someone's lie. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is learn from our mistakes and try to make better choices moving forward. Marcus reached out one more time, about 6 months ago, through a mutual friend. He wanted to know if I would be willing to meet for coffee, to talk, to find some closure. I thought about it for a week before declining. Not because I haven't forgiven him, I have mostly, but because I've built a life that doesn't include that pain anymore, and I'm not interested in revisiting it. Marcus tried to help me, and I'm grateful for that. But his warning is forever tied to the worst experience of my life, and some doors are better left closed. My story isn't unique. There are countless people who have been deceived by those they loved, who have ignored warnings they should have heeded, who have had to rebuild their lives from the ashes of destroyed relationships. If you're one of those people, I want you to know that you're not alone. The pain you feel is valid, the anger you carry is justified, and the fear you have about trusting again is completely understandable. But I also want you to know that healing is possible. That love, real, honest, genuine love, exists even if your first experience was a lie. That you can learn to trust again without being naive, to open your heart without being reckless, to build a beautiful life even after experiencing devastating betrayal. It won't happen overnight. It won't be easy, but it is possible. Today, as I finish writing this, I can hear James downstairs playing with our daughter, their laughter floating up through the house. This is what happiness sounds like. Not the manufactured joy of a wedding day built on lies, but the genuine contentment of a life built on truth. And if I had to go through the pain of my first marriage to get here, to become the woman I am today, then maybe, just maybe, it was worth it after all. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If this story resonated with you, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.